Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, if you didn't remember, and I'm joined also by my co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
Even though it's been a minute since we've been on, it's been a nice little break try to not to consume too much news.
You've
I
still been
mean,
consuming it.
yeah, so now it's back to consuming it, but it's been nice just to try not to, but it still does not, escape us entirely.
Are you saying that you haven't been consuming it just because we haven't been on the show?
I
Or
was gonna
have you
say,
just
has it
not been
escaped me?
spewing it back out,
Right. As I said, I can't
regurgitating
escape
it?
it entirely, but I have not as I've been really busy with work. So, and even though with work I'm still having to consume a lot of news, it's particularly when it comes to these ICE and immigration issues related to some of the employees. But it's still not as much as I have trying to prepare for this show, I should say.
Oh, that's a good thing then.
Yeah.
I guess it's a good thing.
I would say I don't know if that's good or bad because sometimes ignorance is bliss, but sometimes knowledge is power. So whichever one you want to go with.
Well, I took some time off for vacation actually, and so I did enjoy that. I think my favorite place in the world is Southeast Asia. I've come to that
Ah, you
conclusion.
you enjoyed it.
I just enjoy Southeast Asia, period. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with the food. The food. I mean, if I enjoy the food, I enjoy the vacation. So Bali still is number one on my list. The food
That's on
was
my
just
bucket list.
delicious.
Okay, I have to make sure to
Oh
go.
my gosh. It's still number one on my list. But Thai is probably close to two or three. It's tough between Thailand and Vietnam for me. I've only been to Vietnam once and only one city there in about 3 days. Now I need to go back to Vietnam. I have to go back to Vietnam and enjoy more of the area, more of the country, and see more. There's some beautiful places out there in the world that we just never imagined would be very good tourists. Who wants to go to Vietnam? Who thinks to go to Vietnam? You know?
It's funny, a friend of mine went a couple years ago, and that was my first thought was like, why did you pick Vietnam? Because
Mhm.
what we think of is the war, right?
Yeah.
As well as we think their government is pretty strict or, just not so kind to certain people. But
And one of the things I discovered there is that we are so heavily influenced by the opinions provided to us by the media and by our government. And we look at these communistic countries that really regulate all the information that their citizens receive. And we say, shame, shame, shame on them. But the reality of it is that so much of what our beliefs, what we believe, is shaped by information that has been fed to us. Now, with this new information age and social media, we have, and with the internet, we have access to more information than we ever did before. So some of those viewpoints are changing. But 30 years ago, if you had told somebody you were going to Vietnam, frankly, 30 days ago, you probably still like, what are
I
you
was gonna
talking
say
about?
this was a few years ago, so I was still like, what?
But people are starting to find out about it. It was interesting. My friend and I, who travels to these strange places with me, he and I noticed this time we were like, man, there's a lot more black people here this year than we saw last year. And I think people are just really starting to figure this stuff out. And like, hey, we can actually, if we can get there, the vacation is actually cheap. And so the cost of living and the cost of food and housing and everything, and for that matter, clothes and other goods and everything is much less. I took a half empty big suitcase with me and I put a duffel bag in it. And the reason being is because I said, okay, I'll bring all my clothes back in a duffel bag and bring all the new clothes back in my suitcase. Because, of course, you get tailored clothes there for cheaper than you can get them just off the rack
I
here.
was gonna
So
ask you because when I went to Thailand, I did get some clothes made. So I was curious if you did the same. And I heard Vietnam is even better.
now, we didn't do, maybe we'll have to check Vietnam. We got a tailor in Thailand now that we actually like. And so we went back to him and he's got all the measurements and he does really good work, good price. And so This year, just a whole bunch of jackets. So now I'm kind of happy to wear some tailored clothes. And, you got to be careful when you say that as a doctor sometimes because people be like, oh, you are tailored. He's the tailored. No, I get my tailored clothes. I get my clothes tailored cheaply in Thailand. And it makes you
And
wonder,
he has such a weird body shape, guys, that we beg him to get it tailored.
you
I
know,
tease. I'm
American clothes just don't fit this athletic frame, you know.
not. And the
By
people
the
can
time
see
you get
it.
and serious, this is a serious issue when you have like clothes aren't made for black people. Certainly not black men around here, especially if you got broad shoulders, you got a
Pretty certain not for
48.
black, again, black people, because again, when us black women got the hips these jeans are
That's
not
true.
fitting into.
That's true. That's true. But when you make a suit, if you need a 48, they usually drop down the waist size to about six. So if you get a 48 jacket, your waist size is going to be a 42. And there's no way in this world I wear a size 42. And so by the time you try to get it adjusted and take it down to a 36, you got 8 inches of material that you have to do. And then your pockets are up on each other. So when you have an athletic build like I do, it's important that you have the right kind of clothes. And, no better way to do it than have it tailored. So,
Way to start off with some jokes. You mentioned the lack of, I guess, objectivity by the news that we consume. And with the recent shooting over at the CDC and Florida now trying to remove, or the Surgeon General there is trying to remove the requirement of vaccines for children. I mean, do you think some of that is a product of misinformation? Does that concern you as a doctor in terms of how we're now looking at vaccines as well as some of these historically dangerous diseases like measles and polio, and the care that we're doing with that now?
I think it's all a product of misinformation. And the irony of it is that that argument can be made on either side because when you got so
Right.
much access to information, you always ask what information is true. Have they been lying to you all this time about the efficacy of vaccines? Have they been lying to you about the science behind it? And the answer to that is generally no. But when you get so much information available to you, and when you live in a free society that allows free speech and access to free information, then you're going to inevitably get some people who are getting false information. And when that false information is repeated over and over again from different sources, usually involving the same information, but it's recycled to other people and in other venues. Um, then you start to believe those things. And so it makes me wonder whether or not the Surgeon General, for example, in Florida, do they actually believe that this information is false, or RFK? Do you actually believe that the data is false? Or do you have some other agenda? And then, so the question I have to ask is, what would be your agenda? What's your agenda to remove vaccines that have saved hundreds of millions of people's lives around the world for over the past several decades? What's your reasoning for having nearly eradicated polio and now seeing a resurgence? And same thing with rubella and measles and people not dying from measles. And now all of a sudden you got people dying from measles. What's your rationale for wanting to remove those protections? And I get it that you believe that it's causing more harm, and most of them refer to the surgence of autism or spectrum disorders, and they say that they think there's a link between that and vaccinations, but the data just doesn't hold. And one of the reasons why we see it surging is because it's being now diagnosed more frequently. Doesn't mean that the incidence is higher. It's just mean it's diagnosis given a name now more so. Whereas in decades past, that child just be labeled as special and put into special eds and not necessarily given that diagnosis of autism or spectrum. Now, when you call it spectrum disorder, that puts a whole lot of more people on that spectrum because the spectrum is much wider. And so people who would have just already been thought to be slow, as they would call it, slow, um, and put into remedial classes are now given a diagnosis. And so it seems like the numbers are going up. In reality, they aren't.
Well,
Our
even
awareness is going up.
concerning, I think it's one thing, like an RFK Jr., thing, we kind of looked at him as a conspiracist well before he was appointed into this position. But the Surgeon General, I mean, I'd imagine again as a professional, it's one thing again, a lot of information, but a lot of times we're saying, oh, this is from people who don't study science or who haven't gone through medical school and stuff like that. And so it's easier to try to dismiss them. But now when you have professional doctors that are saying, hey, let's remove this, and I know his argument has been, well, I think this is something parents should be able to decide and not forced upon. But nonetheless, if you are not going to, as a medical professional, educate parents so that they are making informed decisions, I mean, again, as a doctor, does that not concern you even more so than the fact that there's just a lot of information out there?
Well, again, it boils back down to what information are you receiving?
But
What
that's just say this is
information are you
information from
gleaning?
doctors now. I mean, that's why
Yeah,
I'm
what,
like, it's one thing to receive it from lay people who are conspiracy theorists. It's another to now have these doctors saying it. Because then I mean, I'm not a parent, but I imagine as a parent, then when you are trusting on professionals to be able to tell you so you can make informed decisions. But now you can't discern what's information and what is, misinformation based on even the professionals. I think that's difficult.
so my question is, what information are those doctors receiving? Because you still have information. You can always, anytime you have data, you're going to have some contradicting data, some that don't support it, some evidence. You can always find some holes in the way that a study was performed. If you critically analyze any scientific study, you can find some of the pitfalls and some of the biases and some of the misinterpretations or overreaches of that study. And there's a thing called a meta-analysis where you take all the people who study, let's say, for example, the COVID vaccine, and whether or not, let's look at hydroxychloroquine, since that's a cute, big one. You look at all of the studies that were done on hydroxychloroquine, and there are a variety of different types of, and its efficacy for treating and or preventing COVID or preventing death in COVID. So each one of these studies asks a specific question. Then they have a certain study design. Is this a retrospective, meaning that we're just going to look in the past at all the people who have taken hydroxychloroquine at the beginning of their infection and how many of them died or how many of them were hospitalized? Or are we going to do a prospective study where we say, okay, as soon as you're diagnosed, we're moving forward. As soon as you diagnose, this group is going to get hydroxychloroquine, this group is going to get the regular treatments that we have. And you move forward and you measure their response. So you got retrospective, prospective studies, you've got case reports, you got issues that are randomized and meaning that you randomly attribute certain treatments to a group of people versus saying, okay, I'm going to cherry pick this group of people who aren't very sick and just give them the one medicine and then say that the medicine worked. Well, you had a population of people who were less sick, and so of course they're going to get better. And so that's going to skew your data. So you have to look to see, was the study randomized? Is it placebo controlled? Are you giving people a placebo and comparing it against a treatment? Is it blinded or is it unblinded? Blinded meaning, say, the researchers, when it's blinded, the researchers do not know what patient was given which intervention, whether they were given a placebo, fake medicine, or they were given the true tested experimental medication. And so the gold standard then is randomized, placebo-controlled, blinded stuff, double-blinded studies. Double-blinded meaning that the patient doesn't know whether they got the placebo or the medicine, and the researchers don't know. And so you don't know who got which medicine until after the data is already compiled, and then you unblind the study. So that's the gold standard, a randomized, placebo-controlled, prospective, double-blinded study. And so you look at, when you get these meta-analysis, you look at all the studies that looked at how effective hydroxychloroquine was at treating or preventing death in COVID. And then you say, let's compile the data from all of these different groups. Some of those studies will have certain exclusion criteria, inclusion criteria that you say they can't be included in this meta-analysis. And so you take those things out. And then you combine what is the overall result of this meta-analysis, all these other studies, and then you make a conclusion. Well, here's the issue with some people. They'll say, well, you excluded some of the very important studies that would have shown that hydroxychloroquine was effective. Well, why did you exclude them? And then so you have these reasons why you excluded those studies. And then you say, well, in my opinion, that's not a justifiable reason. The only reason why you excluded it is because you didn't want it to, because it showed that hydroxychloroquine made a difference. And so you got doctors who are now consuming some of this information, and they may have their own particular biases, and their own particular biases influence how they interpret the information that they were given.
I was
And
going to
so
say
it's
everything you're saying is what I imagine you study in medical school or you study when you research for public health. You learn that hey, you have to look at certain parameters, you have to evaluate certain questions, you have to make sure you're looking at both sides of the spectrum. And so that's why it concerns me with medical professionals that are aligning to some degree with what's going on because then I'm like, this is what you did in medical school. You learned that certain things get excluded or you learn that there could be biases in certain research, or you learn that, hey, certain bodies may react differently to certain medications than others. And so for you to only take one source and say, oh, based on this one source, vaccines are bad, you know better. Why are you doing this
reality
to us?
is, the sad reality of it is that most medical doctors don't learn this stuff in medical school because that's basic science research stuff. We hear about it and we know we have a cursory understanding of how studies are designed, but most doctors don't have not clinical, but basic science or clinical research experience. Most of us don't have that. And so I'd be curious to know what the Surgeon General's in Florida's history is in terms of being able to critically evaluate literature. Most doctors don't know how to critically, most MDs, I should say, don't really know how to critically evaluate. That's just my opinion, how to critically evaluate scientific research. I know how to do it because I got a PhD in pharmacology and cell biophysics. That's where I learned how to critically evaluate literature and scientific data, not through medical school. You're just not going to get that through medical school. And
I
so
was
in
gonna
medical
say, so for
school,
those parents who are listening to doctors, maybe ask, "Hey, do you have any research background or for
well, some of it is coming from, those people who they say, I trust the people who actually do have the expertise in this. And this is the recommendation of the CDC. And because the CDC is filled with people who do this for a living, this is what they do. This is how they
used to be?"
evaluate the literature. Used to be.
I was gonna say,
And
we know RFK Jr. does not
yeah.
do this for a
And
living.
And that being said, there's still a lot of gray area. Yeah, there's a lot of gray area where you say, okay, it's a consensus of us felt like that this study shouldn't be included. Well, if you had a consensus of anti-vaxxers who are looking at things, they're going to have a different consensus. They're going to say, okay, well, we think that they should have been included, and that this is not a strong enough reason to exclude that study in this. So science, like I know a lot of people like to think that science is absolute. Science is not. It's very subjective. It's very interpretive. There's a thought that you say that a hypothesis can never be proven. It can't because there's always you don't know what you don't know. You can disprove some hypotheses, but you can never prove that something exists. And so you spend your life trying to disprove a whole bunch of things. I spend your whole career trying to disprove some things. And that leaves a lot of area for gray
Are
in the midst of
vaccines great for you? Or is that one of those that's not very subjective?
For me, vaccines are clear. It's clear that, that they have saved lives. George Washington, we went back to this when he was president. He had the decision as to whether or not to force the military to take the smallpox vaccination. I think it was George Washington around that time. And, we just found out, we just learned about vaccines from smallpox. People were getting smallpox, and during the war, actually, a lot of soldiers were dying from smallpox. And so you decided that he had to make a decision whether or not he was going to force the military enrollees or enlistees to servicemen and men at that time to take the vaccine. And when he did, a lot of people, it was actually beneficial because it really helped to keep the troops safe and healthier during the time, and it was to our benefit. But now we've got our liberties, and this is one of the things that this bothers me right now. Is because a couple years ago, when people were talking about 9/11 and they were talking about the scanners, and they were talking about a whole bunch of other things about safety, and they quoted, I think it was Ben Franklin. I don't can't remember if it was Ben Franklin or not. He said, "Those who would sacrifice liberty for safety deserve neither." And it's funny to me because now a couple years ago, is Republicans criticizing some of the measures that um oh, it was even with the vaccine. They were talking about those who would compromise liberties for safety, meaning in government mandated vaccines. They said they deserve neither. And now what are they doing? They're allowing they're conceding to national troops being on the streets of cities because they're compromising a liberty for safety. Now it's acceptable for them because it supports and it advances their political agenda. Yeah, we need to have the people. We're talking about Nashville, in the city of Nashville. One of the U.S. representatives um, for Tennessee is now saying, "Hey, we need to get the National Guards on the streets in Nashville." And I'm sitting there thinking, like, y'all are such hypocrites. One breath you say you can't compromise your liberty for safety, and now all of a sudden you want to see the military on the streets, policing citizens. That's ridiculous to me. But
Well, we talked a little bit about public health hurt, which are you predicting that RFK Jr. is not going to make it to the end of the term? Or are you thinking, oh, he may?
and not unless they impeach him. So that's the
I
only
mean,
issue.
we've got some Republicans based on the hearing. There are some Republicans that were very critical of
Yeah, you
him
got to
during
take
those
two
hearings.
thirds. I don't know if you can get two
You
thirds
still
of the
not know.
body.
But
Yeah.
so more and more may come along because we've got the CDC director who was fired. She's speaking out very heavily. We've got a lot of people that are writing petitions. I think even at the CDC, I think they got at least 1,000 or so signatures on a petition to oust RFK Jr. So, there's hope. I mean, even though I know it's still far in the distance, but hope. So moving on to just as you was getting to some government hurt with these immigration raids, again these troops, because I know up in DC he's put troops and he's got states sending their troops to go help in DC. And when you, at least from some of the reporting I'm receiving, because as you articulated, a lot of things can be misinformation, but some of the reporting I received is that a lot of restaurants in DC are not happy. Some of the people in DC are not happy. And even from what I'm hearing, some of the troops that are there are saying, hey, what we're really doing is picking up trash or just aimlessly walking. And some of them wish they could be back in their home state with their families because the amount of money that they're receiving is not nearly as much as they would receive back in their families doing whatever employment they were doing in their home state. So we've got that going on. And recently here in Georgia, there was a raid, immigration raid of one of the Hyundai plants. I think they got almost 500 people that they arrested. Some are probably majority are on visas, but they're claiming, oh, that they overstayed their visiting visa. But that's going on, and that is hurting businesses beyond measure. As we can see, it being over 500 at one plant. You can imagine some of the hurt there, and it's going to be a trickle effect for a lot of these businesses that are using immigration or immigrants who are here on a visa. Um, they're removing them, and I could even say the fact that they're rolling out some of these temporary protected status (TPS) visas so for a lot of these employees or workers, they had a visa that was set to expire in 2026 or 2028. And now that he's removed it from for TPS protection with like Haiti, which we saw as it relates to Ohio, I think also Venezuela, Mexico, just rolling them back. Now you're having employers having to terminate a lot of individuals that they expected to be here at least until 2026. And so that's happening. And then we've got a judge saying your tariffs are illegal. And and the government could possibly owe what, almost 4 billion or so to a lot of these companies who have been paying tariffs. So there's a lot of government hurt going on. What are your, are you hurting? Are you laughing to keep from crying?
No,
Where are we with
you
all
know,
this?
there's a lot of it. I read a statistic that over 300,000 Black women have lost their jobs over the past 8 months. 300,000
Not
Black
to
women.
mention, Black business owners are
Mhm.
not able to handle the tariffs, and so a lot of those businesses are going bankrupt.
Yeah. And you can think, is that an unintended consequence? I don't think it is. You know good and well that what happens is that historically, the private sector have not been kind to hiring minorities. They would, of course, preferentially hire white people historically. And the government is the one place where a lot of minorities could find employment. And so when you shut down the government, you know you're going to disproportionately impact Black employment. And so the Black unemployment numbers have gone up by a full 1%. And all I can do is say, people see people who voted for Donald Trump, particularly Black people who voted for him, you're F and FAFO. That's what's happening right now. You're FA and FO. And that might be your mother.
As well as Latinos, Black and brown people, because
Yeah.
again, this immigration rate is affecting us more than anything, because you know they're racially profiling.
No, no doubt about it. And so it is what it is at this point. And until that other boot drops, we don't I don't think
How
we've
many more
even
boots? I can even get how many more boots? Because
boots on the ground. Boots
if
on the
it
ground.
turns out, which I would be surprised if the Supreme Court does uphold the judge's ruling as it relates to terrorists, but if they were, I mean, we're already in trillions of debt. Can you
Right.
imagine, having to pay back all these businesses for these tariffs? I mean that is a huge boot to drop if that were to happen.
It is. It's a huge boot to drop, but it's a making of our own, and
Democracy,
as a
right?
country. Huh?
Democracy, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's what we did. And at some point we have to blame social media, I think,
Because you
for
blame,
some.
no,
I
I'm
do.
still gonna blame the hate. I am still gonna blame hate.
Yeah. But I had an employee this past week came and said, Donald Trump is dead. Did you know that? He's dead.
Oh yeah.
Yes, he is. Because I saw it on Google and I saw it on TikTok. And she was dead serious. I was like, "Are you serious?
Wow.
You really believe what you're seeing on Google, and you're citing Google and TikTok as a reliable source right now." And the sad part is that I don't think that that's that unique of a situation. There are people across the country who get their information from these social media sites, TikTok, get their information from Google. And when they see it on those things, they don't have any barometer or any gauge to determine the truthfulness of it. And so as a result, when they see it over and over again, the key to learning is, I told my children as they were growing up, the key to learning is repetition. If something gets repeated to you over and over and over again, guess what? You're going to learn that. That's going to be ingrained in you, and this is what you're going to believe. And people who just stay on social media, like addicted to social media, and there's no gates, no boundaries or constraints about what information is, uh, which is on social media. Um, I'm laughing.
I take
And,
it there's a family member that's tickling your toes down there, huh?
no, a viewer said, "Can you get to the topic?" That's true. We have spent a lot of time.
We
See,
have
here's the issue. This
we've
is the
been out for
problem with
so
being
long that we
gone for
have
three
to
weeks.
catch up a little bit on the news. Well, fine, because we don't want to hurt our viewers anymore.
But yeah, but these things are, so what happens is social media hurts people, and how social media hurts people. That hurts people because it gives us information that causes us to move and act, and those actions have unintended consequences. And a lot of times you don't know the consequences until after you've done it. And so now we got government hurt, and it's gonna hurt a lot more people. And my concern is that the church is not going to be in a position to be able to help those people who have been hurt. And even if they are in a position to help those people, they won't be trustworthy to hurt them, because the church has been one of the people who have actually seemed to be endorsing a lot of the things that's hurting people right now. And when I say the church, I'm saying I call them the salt substitute, because they're not the salt. The Bible tells us we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. And I don't think that the ones who have the loudest voices are salts. They're salt substitute. They look like they're supposed to be. They act like they're supposed to be. They proclaim that they are the salt of the earth. But the reality is what they're doing. They might be providing some seasonings, but it's not the salt.
Which does lead into our topic, and so I'm glad we transitioned into that because I do think, to your point, people are going to look somewhere for hope. And if they don't go to the church, I imagine it's because there is some hurt or there is something that has like a PTSD type feeling in which they don't feel like they can go to the church. But I'm curious to you, when someone says, "Oh, I have church hurt," what does that mean to you, or how are you interpreting that?
It's any number of things. Any number of things. Because first of all, we have to realize that church is just consumed of people, people who are fallible, people who are flawed. And that's from the back door of the church to the pulpit. We are all flawed. And we are all saved by grace, and we all are in great need of God's grace. And so I think until you start with that as a premise, then you cannot find any help in the church. Until you start with that as a premise, I don't think you can be of any help in the church until you start recognizing that I'm just as flawed as you are. And I am susceptible to all the temptations that you are susceptible. If Jesus was susceptible to every temptation given to men, then that means what makes me think that I'm not susceptible to that. And the only way that I can resist it is that the grace of God covers me. And which part of the grace of God is not covering me then exposes my flesh, and my flesh is manifested. I use it like a sock theory, and I know people people don't like to say the grace of God is like a sock, but the reality is if you got a sock and you pull that sock all the way up, it's covering your flesh. But if that sock starts to droop, your flesh becomes revealed. And the issue is for some people, let's say, for example, stealing might be at the calf, homosexuality might be at the ankle, killing somebody at the toe. But that's where it is for me. But what if it was at, what if for some people homosexuality might be at the calf, killing somebody might be at the ankle, and then say, I'll never steal from somebody. The reality is that we are still all capable of doing it because it's still somewhere in your flesh to be able to do it. The only reason you haven't done it is because the grace of God has covered you. And our goal then should be, as ministers of the gospel, to help people understand how the grace of God keeps them from falling, how the grace of God keeps me from falling. And if I can keep your focus on the grace of God causing you to abstain from these things and keeping me from helping me to keep from doing these things, then I think we put the onus in the right place. We say it's God that's keeping us, and we don't put ourselves on a pedestal, and we don't allow other people to put us on a pedestal.
I think that is definitely how the church is failing. I think sometimes when people say church hurt, there's two categories, at least from my opinion. There's the one of you were actually traumatized, whether that is that you suffered some abuse, or whether that is you were taken advantage of some way, or even I think most recently, Florida, once again, topic. They have a pastor out in Tampa, one of the mega churches down there, who is now being arrested for extortion, fraud, and some other stuff. And I do think some people will look at the church and say, oh, it's just a means to extort money from me without giving me assistance or help. And I think that's one category. But I think the other category, which I find from my experience is what I hear a lot more so is, oh, the church is just beating into me a message that doesn't help or resonate with me. Or so again, like what you're saying, they beat into, oh, saved by grace. And so then when I come, and say, hey, I'm having this financial issue or I'm having this relational issue. I'm not getting help. I'm just getting that, oh, you're saved by grace. Jesus will handle it. And don't forget to tithe. You know, and I can understand from that, just as you articulated, how then the church is not helping. Because yes, the hopefully the salvation message is something that you got to make sure to understand and stay and repeatedly say, as you pointed out, because it's more, the more times you say it, the more times perhaps you'll believe it. But at the same time, there has to be a deeper dive into, okay, how is it do I walk in Christ? Or how is it that I can rest on that so that as I'm experiencing these hard times, I'm not so focused on my pain. I'm able to say, okay, as long as I am obedient, or as long as I'm praising and worship in the manner that God has required of me, I am going to be okay knowing that I will at some point get through this. And I don't know, to some degree, there is some fault on the person, because if you're just going to church on a Sunday, you're not going to truly get that message. Because
You
I
put
do
church
think
hurt on the person?
just some of that is on the person, because, and I imagine, because I often look at this as a parent-child relationship. As a parent, you can tell these lessons over and over, but if your child is going another way, do some of that is on them, and some of that is perhaps on you as a parent. You got to think of new message or new ways of saying the message, but there's some fault on the child as well, as to whether or not they're hearing and truly understanding, or if they're just like, well, no, I got to experience it for myself. This over here sounds too tempting. And so I know my dad is saying, hey, don't go try that drug. But everyone else is saying it's cool. And so kind of like the fruit, right? Is it truly, am I missing out on the knowledge of good and evil here? Or is what dad's saying in my best interest? And you feel like you got to do that yourself. And so I think some of the church hurt is, hey, I am not getting entertained. I'm not getting fed in the manner that I want because I'm still hurting. So let me find another avenue, because I just think that they're using me to be able to support a lifestyle that is more extravagant than my own.
So we can agree that I think like physical abuse, sexual abuse, or extortion, those type of things that are done, unfortunately, by members of the church and leaders in the church, those are wrong. Those should be out.
Look at us
And
agreeing. We are
yes.
objective. There's no very subjective in that. We objectively agree that it's wrong.
Yeah, we start with the extreme stuff, and which unfortunately we both agree that it happens too often. It should never happen. One time is too many, but it does still happen that there are predatory leaders within the church, and I don't know how you get those people out other than through
Well,
the
we know
law.
how, but we're not. People are leaving instead of pushing them out. Because I mean, to me, we know how by, it's like I said in his Bible, we're supposed to gather one each other and remove that person. But I think, again, instead of doing that, we're just saying we're going to leave the church,
Hmm.
and so we're not actively removing those people.
Well, the we that is it bothers me when you say that because I don't know which we you're talking about. That
We as in
pronoun is so
believers.
broad.
We as in
Um,
believers. Because it's just, again,
okay.
just as you started, even when it comes to government, we're seeing a lot of, what did you say, substitute salts or
But
salt
are you
substitute.
saying, but are you saying the we, meaning the ones who are offended or the ones who are assaulted or the victims? Or are you saying we, the ones who are the observers and the other supporters?
I'm saying we
Because
as
yeah,
believers, we are, as the believers of this body, are not removing the false teachers, the predators, all that.
yeah. Um, I don't know about that. I don't know that I agree with that because people are ousted from churches a lot of times. Leaders are ousted from churches a lot. Now, the
You
Catholic
started this
Church,
saying, I don't know
you
how
can
to get them out. And now you're saying, oh, we are
no, I said
ousted.
other I said I don't know how to get them out other than by the law. Especially if they've broken a law. If they've broken a law, then yeah, the law is going to be one way to get them out and get them prosecuted, and they should be prosecuted according to the law. And so, especially if it's a crime that was committed against somebody. And so, I think so we have to separate this church herd out from something where pastors that are doing things illegal. The believers are not trying to protect them. Yeah, I don't think they're really trying to protect them. They're like, okay, church leaders, if you look at the Catholic Church has done a lot to try to protect those persons who they
But look how
know.
long it took, and they still
It,
are having some issues with
right,
that. And
right,
so, I mean,
right.
that's why I'm saying we know how to do it. We're just not doing it perhaps as immediate as we should. But
But
no, we know how to
I
do
wouldn't put myself as a believer in that we group that you're talking about because I'm in
it.
the we group that says we need to get rid of all
Hey,
of them.
there's no I in team. We are a church body. We are all
And
a part of the body of Christ.
you might be Christian, but you are not the church. I did a sermon on that one. It takes a whole lot. It's a lot easier to become a Christian than it is to be the church. And Jesus didn't say he was coming back for Christians. He said he was coming back for the church that was without spot or blemish. And so there are a lot of people who profess to say that they're Christians. Jesus even said, he said, there's going to be a lot of people who say, Lord, Lord, did we not heal the sick in your name and cast out demons in your name and prophesy in your name? He said, I'm going to say to you, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, because I never knew you. I knew you not. And I think there's a distinction between Christians and who the church really is. Christians are people who just profess, but they were never known of Jesus. The church are the ones who are known of Jesus and the ones that Jesus are coming back. The ones who God said, I know you. I call you brothers. I no longer call you servants, but I call you friend now. I know you. You know me. Why? Because you keep my commandments. You do the things that I say to do. And so I think the church is a lot smaller than what we really think that it really is. We look at the Christian church, and it's huge, it's humongous. But the actual true church is much smaller than what I think we really expect it to be. Because not everybody who claims to be Christian is actually following the
We
statutes and
know, but
ordinances
we're
of
also talking about
Christ.
church hurt. And I'd imagine if we're in talking about that, I'm sure based on what you're saying, your point would be, well, the actual church, by what biblical standards is not hurting
Right,
you.
right.
But when we talk about church hurt, there is,
Institutional.
it's an immense group. And then I also would say to some degree, then the topic should be how do we determine who's of the church? Because, your point is well taken, but at the same time, we don't know people's hearts sometimes. We aren't able to look inside a person as Christ can. And so when we're going to these churches, I imagine there is a initial trust there until someone breaks it. And to some degree, yeah, you probably need to read the Bible for yourself before you walk in there based on to some degree what you're saying. But if we're taking it from the position that, hey, listen, there are people who profess to be of Christ who are hurting people. And that is deterring the church by biblical standards from being able to save people.
Mhm.
Then we've got to be able to tell or articulate, well, how do we know which is the church and which is just false teachers professing to be the church?
Well, Jesus told us, he said, you know a true tree by the fruit that it bears. And the question
And some
is
of
that
them are bearing a lot of fruit. I mean, a lot
we're
of
not
mega
looking at the
churches.
right fruit. We're not looking at the right fruit. Jesus wasn't talking about the fruit, wasn't talking about legislation, wasn't talking about policy, wasn't talking about the number of people in your congregations, wasn't talking about the number of different outreaches that you have. Jesus was talking about the fruit and also the fruit of the spirit. Said long suffering, peace, joy, patience, and all the other fruit, whatever there. I should
All
know them.
this that you're not going to know unless you intimately know the person. And,
Unless you
and that's a
intimately
problem.
until you study the church. But those of us who are believers, those of us who are in the church, can look at a person and say, "Hey, you're not bearing the fruit." And as a result, I know that you can be toxic and harmful to a new believer and a new disciple who's coming in here. So we need to be proactive about one coming to you and say, hey, you're not living up to it. Like the Bible tells us, if there's an ought against your brother, go to that person and tell them in love. And if they receive you, then you gained a brother. If they haven't, then take them before two or three other persons and then see if they convert. If they don't, then take them before the elders. And if they still haven't, then he said, put them out, get them out of there. Why? Because they're toxic to other would-be disciples. They're toxic to them and they're harmful to them. And that's why people, when they come to the church, they get hurt. And not just by, the flagrant stuff to me, I think those are the obvious things, but it's the small foxes that will ruin the vine, the Bible tells us. It's those little things that really cause the bigger hurt a lot of times. Individually, I think it's things like people watching how you treat foreigners, watching how you treat the poor, watching how you treat prisoners. And I had a debate with somebody this past week, and they were like, I don't know why you think that we're supposed to be taking care of foreigners, and the Bible doesn't say anything about taking care of illegal aliens and how you taking care of prisoners. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Matthew 25 it specifically says, there will be people, as you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me. It's like, it's a, I'll go to many of them and say that when I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. And the three things that he was talking about were the very three things that Jesus was saying in the very three things that he was talking about were the three things that Jesus was saying. If you did it unto them, you did it unto me. And I'm like, how are you missing that as a Christian? How are you missing that as a believer? That you don't see that this is our mission as a body of Christ to do it. The reason is I think people are confusing their citizenship in the United States with their citizenship in the kingdom of God. And so now they've got place a higher priority on their citizen in the United States of America. Yeah, as a citizen of the US, yeah, we've got every right to say, hey, we don't need to see people into our borders. We don't want people crossing our borders, and when they do, we should lock them up and we should treat them this way, or we should kick them out, even if it means separating their families. As a citizen, we should probably say, if you committed a crime, you don't deserve any mercy. You go to jail. As a citizen, we should say, if you're poor, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But as a Christian and as a believer, we should say, yes, we know you entered into this country illegally. And we know that there's a reason why you did. Let's talk about this. Let's find a way to get you back to your home humanely, and create a way for you to be able to come back into this country. And even still, in the process, we're still going to treat you humanely. Yes, it costs money. Yes, it costs money. But if you had the faith that you claimed that you had, it would instruct your actions and God would then provide.
Well, first of all, both of them are costing us money. Deporting is not cheap either. And so, and at least one way your money is being invested, whereas the other way it's a little bit being wasted. But I still, and you were a little harsh on me when I said some of this is then on the person. But to me, by what you're saying is, yeah, as the person, you've got to understand what that book says before you can truly go in and put a lot of your faith and trust in whatever church pastor or the like that is there. Because I think, again, as we talked about in the beginning, there's a lot of hurt going on in various sectors, whether that is your employment, whether that is your health, whether that is government, whatever. And so, yeah, we stay in those sectors. We stay employed by that employer that also has hurt us. We stay in families that also have hurt us. We stay in this government. We continue to pay the taxes, even though, we may experience hurt by the government. But when it comes to the church, oftentimes when you experience that hurt, you leave. And some of that is, did you one understand what the Bible was saying so that when you are in the situation, you either, as you articulated, you find other people to say, hey, I don't think this is right. I think that this is a sin according to the Bible. Do you agree? And if so, why don't we confront the person that has this issue so that we are removing this stain before it gets bigger and bigger and bigger? Because the reality is we are human people, your leaders will make mistakes. And I don't want you to necessarily say that one mistake means that that person is not fit to be the pastor or not fit to be in leadership. Because that I hate for one thing to all of a sudden determine or make an assessment as to who you are. But perhaps even those leaders need people to hold them accountable, they need people to make sure that they're not as what our president wants to do, or you're not a dictator, you're not a king, you're not Christ, you're not infallible to error. And when you are, because we put you in such esteem, we are here to correct you because we recognize you are a face that brings people here versus, oh, I'm hurt, but too many people are here liking this person. I'm just going to leave. So that's why I say I put some of that hurt on the individual. And this is, again, not the objective type hurt, but the other part of hurt. But then again, there is some hurt. Some of that is us as believers, because then we aren't. I'd imagine whatever that person experienced, that's not the first time that they experienced that from a leader. And so that means some of the rest of the congregation is not holding these leaders accountable or even yourselves accountable to ensure that you're not being the hospital versus being this place of judgment. And when it comes to people that come into the church.
Now, I will say, I will place some blame on a believer, a seasoned believer, who leaves the church because they're hurt by something that happened in the church. And when I say seasoned, I mean seasoned, meaning you've been around for some seasons. You know, you spent
Not old, but
many
just
seasons in the church. And if that means that pastor or that leader in the church or whoever it was in the church could do something so heinous that gets you to walk away from the church, then your foundation never was very strong in the first place. I get that you may not want to go to the institutionalized church and church service because you see a lot of the hypocrisy and things of that nature. I get that you don't want to be affiliated with something like that. But there are some groups, there are some gatherings of people who don't necessarily perpetrate the same offenses that you had. There was something that the Lord showed me before. He said, I've got two harvests that I'm looking for. He said, the first harvest is going to be those persons who were once in the church, but who left the church because of offense, neglect, or abuse. And he said, those are going to be the ones that I'm going to redeem first. And then they will be the ones who reach the second group, which are the unchurched, the people who have never really given God a try. And he said, those people will then know how to disciple the unchurched without perpetrating the same offenses, abuse, and neglect that was perpetrated against them. And it reminded me of when Jesus told Peter, he said, you know, before the cock crows three times, you're going to deny me. He said, Satan has desired to sift you as wheat, but I've prayed for you so that when you are converted, meaning that when you return to yourself, that you would go and strengthen your brother. Well, Peter was going to be one of those people. Peter was left because the church hurt himself, though, but he hurt himself. It's like, I can't believe that I let Jesus down like this. He told me I was going to deny him three times. I failed. I'm unworthy. At this point, I'm just going back to what I was doing before I met Jesus, going back out on the boat, fishing again. But Jesus never intended for Peter to stay there. Jesus had an expectation that he was going to be restored, that he was going to be reclaimed for the kingdom's sake. And it wasn't until after that reclamation that Jesus had for him that Peter was able to go out and actually and become a profound apostle and reaching so many other people for the sake of Jesus Christ. I think that I'm sympathetic for those people who have left the church because I'm still praying for them because I believe that when they're converted, they'll know how to disciple the right way. And so, yeah, you might have left the church. Take your little season that you need to take in order to heal from that. If
your
you were
little
a
season.
seasoned believer, uh,
You like take your little season.
take your little season. If you were seasoned before, take your season. Don't walk away from God. Continue to still cultivate that relationship with Him. But then there is a time and there will be a season for you to come back into the church and to be the change that you wish you had seen before in the past. And that's what needs to happen is because um, the other part about, people who I can't blame people who are visiting church for the first time and don't know and haven't had a chance to even grow. Those who are babes in Christ, I can't blame them if they saw something in the church or if they were harmed by something in the church and it scared them away. It spooked them. And they're like, I'm not going back to that place because that place, I don't blame them. I blame the people who perpetrated that against them. But people who are seasoned and who leave the church because they saw something, they were offended by it, and then they say, I'm done with the church forever. Yeah, I got a problem with that because I'm like, where was your faith in the first place? Because your faith sounds like it was in men and not in the Bible. But Jesus tells us is that it's impossible that offenses won't come. But he says, "But woe unto them by whom they come. It's better that a millstone be tied around their neck and that they be cast into the sea than to offend one of the least of these." And I think he was talking about when he said that word offense means to block or to prevent them from coming into the kingdom. If something that we're doing as believers are stopping other would-be believers from coming to the kingdom. The Bible says it's better that we be cast into the sea with a stone around our neck so that we can't actually that we drown in the sea. And I think unfortunately there's a lot of evangelicals, a lot of things that we're doing in the political sphere that is offending and or blocking people from wanting to ever know anything about Jesus Christ. Because they say, how can you as a Christian advocate for the treatment of immigrant children? Was it these Guatemalan children he was trying to put on a plane and ship back? You know, how can you as a Christian endorse that? How can you as a Christian endorse taking food from the mouths of very hungry children and poor parents? How can you as a Christian endorse, the
Wait, are
mass
you going to put
firing?
in Gaza and Israel in there?
Huh?
Are you going to?
That I can't
I
speak
just
on
didn't
that
know how
one
far you were
because
going. I was like, are you about to
I
hit Gaza?
I can't speak on that one because I know God has told people to wipe out entire nations of people, including women and children. And by our human standards and by our earthly um, laws and international law, that would be considered, you know, a violation of international law and punishable.
Yeah,
But
but to
God
me,
said, kill all of them.
it's
So
a different when Jesus came, that God of the Old Testament was no longer the God that of the New Testament. I mean, he made it very clear, your
maybe,
first commandment, love, God and then love others, And so you can't, to me, I mean, I know that's a very political topic, but
yeah.
you got international law saying that what they are doing is genocide. I mean, you've got Netanyahu probably about to be charged and arrested for what he's doing. But to me, you can't have sympathy for only certain children. I you either sympathize and say no, 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 starving children, blowing up hospitals, that all that is wrong.
Yeah.
Um, or you say, oh, well, God has a reason here. And so then to me, they can make that argument in any
But
circumstance.
they're justified. And so I posted something this week. I said, I'm so sick and tired of people justifying immorality, justifying inhumanity by dollars and cents. Because, people justify these things. They say, well, we don't have the money for it. That is not a justification for it. They broke a human law or they broke our laws. That's not a justification, I think, from the standpoint of the kingdom of God. If you're saying, yeah, the reason why we're doing this is because we don't have the money for it, that's not a good justification for me. As a believer, as a citizen of the United States, okay, I understand that. But as a believer, we should be saying there's got to be another way. We have to find another way. I understand that the money is not here right now, but we have to find a way to get the money because we can't allow these things to continue.
And if we're
And that's
truly
what we're not
honest
hearing.
about why the money isn't there, then we need to be honest about the corruption that is forcing us not to have the means. I think sometimes even when we're looking at our own walks and we ask ourselves, why am I in so much debt? Or why am I not able to eat a certain way? To some degree, if you ask yourself, hey, I'm asking God to help me, and God says, well, this is the tool book. I told you about the Daniel fast. Hey, here's the tool book. I told you about, all this extravagant spending, and yet you don't change, then you're not asking God to help.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, if you hurt, you got to ask God to help to heal it.
But then you
So,
got to be honest about how he chooses to help you because it may not be how you want to be helped, but that is
uh-oh.
that is his way. I know that's a topic for another day.
It sounds like next week, huh?
Well, hopefully, people are tuning in and commenting, especially since we've got one commenter that's keeping us on task. Thank you for that accountability. That's what we are missing sometimes in the church. Keep us on topic. But if you have not been tuning in, please make sure that you tuned in and comment and like this episode. Hopefully, you've been catching some of our other episodes. You can also catch a repeat of this episode on KDA Live as well as Star Radio, as well as YouTube. Make sure you are subscribed over to YouTube, and hopefully, you are following us on your favorite podcast platform. Until next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.